The air above Epsilon Vorn shimmered with a heat no sun could produce, a static that made the metallic spires of the ruined city hum in uneasy resonance. Smoke curled from fissures in obsidian streets, carrying particles that glowed faintly in shades no human eye could normally perceive. Somewhere above the jagged horizon, fragments of a shattered fleet floated in orbit, half-burned and spinning lazily, casting eerie reflections across the darkened landscape below. And there, in the center of the ruins, lay the creature. It was impossible at first glance to comprehend the sheer scale of it. Even from a distance, the mass of the Epsilon dragon dominated the valley like a mountain of living metal, a sprawl of glimmering scales cracked and blackened from 1,000 battles, each one capable of piercing starship hulls. Its wings were shredded, some membranes fused into crystalline shards, and yet the bones beneath still pulsed faintly with a violet bioluminescence, like a heart fighting against the inevitable. Smoke and ash rolled from its nostrils, carrying the scent of ozone and scorched plasma. Around it, the alien observers hovered at impossible distances, their ships forming a loose, trembling ring, sensors straining to catalog every microsecond of the dying moment. The aliens themselves were a collection of nightmares and wonders. The Tark Dominion's warriors, armored in shells that refracted starlight into dizzying patterns, adjusted the targeting of plasma rifles that had ended entire fleets with a thought. Near them floated the scholars of the Zerathi, bodies semi-transparent, their neural tendrils pulsing with curiosity as they interfaced with hovering data arrays. Even the human representatives, a small contingent of exobiologists, had been forced to retreat to safer orbits, their sensors overloaded by the energy flux radiating from the dragon's core. None dared descend closer than the perimeter, a perfect semicircle of fear and awe. A subtle vibration hummed through the ground. It was almost imperceptible, a rhythm too steady to be natural, yet too uneven to be mechanical. The dragon's heartbeat, or perhaps the echo of its dying will, reverberated through the obsidian rubble. The sensors in orbit quivered and flickered, unable to reconcile the readings, quantum fluctuations dancing in perfect alignment with a bioelectrical pattern too complex to classify. The watchers exchanged nervous signals, the closest equivalent to language many could muster under such awe. This was no mere beast. It was a fragment of the universe made manifest, and even at the edge of death, it dominated all comprehension. And then, from a shadowed alley between fractured spires, something small moved. Barefoot, incongruous, and impossibly fragile against the backdrop of galactic terror, the child appeared. No suit, no armor, only a tattered tunic that fluttered in the ion wind. The adults and aliens alike stiffened in disbelief. Translators buzzed warnings into calm arrays, but the child ignored them all, stepping over shards of plasma-scorched stone as though walking across a garden path. The wind seemed to part around them, yet the static continued to thrum, growing more intense. Sensors in orbit registered a spike in harmonic resonance, not from the dragon, but from the child's own biofield. This tiny human emitted a signal that no technology, no weapon, and no alien consciousness could predict. The dragon's eye, a sphere larger than most moons, remained half-lidded, unfocused and clouded with pain. Its body shifted slightly as if sensing something in the air, a tremor that caused fragments of nearby stone to dance in microorbits. The aliens froze, collectively holding every breath their species could muster. The child approached closer, humming a tune that was faint, almost lost beneath the roaring static of the dying dragon. Every step seemed impossible, defying both instinct and reason. The ground itself seemed to hold its breath. The child stopped at the very edge of the dragon's snout. A single scale, cracked and glowing faintly, reflected their small, wide eyes. For a heartbeat, the universe itself appeared to pause, suspended in a moment between endings and beginnings. The dragon inhaled, a rasping sound like tectonic plates grinding across a dead planet, and the child leaned forward, tilting their head, and placed a kiss on the creature's snout. Nothing exploded. No energy spike tore the atmosphere. And yet, the world changed. The static throbbed like a drumbeat of creation. The dragon trembled, its wings twitching as though remembering the flight of centuries. The violet glow of its core flared briefly, then softened. A deep, resonant purr vibrated from its chest, a sound so alien and pure that even the Tark Dominion warriors lowered their weapons involuntarily. The child laughed, a tiny, melodic sound that carried across the obsidian plains and even into orbit, and the dragon's head tilted, watching with an eye that now held something curious, something ancient, recognition. The crowd of aliens, previously frozen by fear, dared not move. Every mind present struggled to interpret what they were seeing. The largest predator in the galaxy, feared beyond all measure, was alive again, yet it posed no threat. It had, for reasons incomprehensible, accepted a human child. Sensors detected a quantum resonance so perfect it shattered every previous model of energy interaction. The dragon's bioplasmic core seemed to pulse in synchrony with the child's heartbeat, creating a harmony that radiated outward in waves across the valley. Machines overloaded. Drones dropped from orbit. Even the smallest particles of dust in the air glowed in response. Time seemed to fracture. Minutes stretched into eternities, and in that frozen moment, a silent understanding passed through the dragon's gaze. The child, fearless and infinitesimal against the enormity of cosmic power, had breached every instinct of survival, domination, and violence. For the first time in 1,000 generations, the Epsilon dragon's purr was not a warning, it was a greeting. And somewhere deep within the swirling black sky above, distant stars shimmered as if acknowledging that the impossible had just taken place. The child backed away slowly, never breaking eye contact. The dragon lowered its immense head slightly, wings folding in subtle arcs of surrender and recognition. Around them, the aliens still hovered, uncertain whether to flee or kneel, but the static no longer threatened to tear the city apart. For now, the valley held its breath, balanced between awe and disbelief, waiting for what would happen next. The universe, it seemed, was watching. The aliens did not move. Not a single clawed foot shifted, not a hovercraft thruster flickered, not even the tiniest spore-like drone dared to adjust its orbit. The child stood frozen for a heartbeat, the echo of the dragon's purr vibrating faintly through the cracked obsidian underfoot, a resonance that seemed to reach into the very neurons of the assembled species. They had expected death, or at least a display of raw, catastrophic power, but what unfolded was something that defied the logic embedded into every sensor, every instinct, every warrior's code. The dragon, immense and still trembling, did not roar. It simply watched. Its great eye, reflecting fractured nebulae and distant suns, studied the child as though measuring some intrinsic truth that no calculation or weapon could ever hope to quantify. A low hum began, subtle but persistent, rising from the ruins themselves. The fissures in the obsidian streets shivered, tiny shards levitating, spinning in complex patterns around the child's feet. Energy readings went berserk in orbit. Every gauge, every scanner, every biosensor registered anomalies that spiked and then flattened unpredictably, as if the dragon and the child were rewriting the very laws of physics with every breath they drew. The Tark warriors shifted uneasily. Their targeting systems, designed to track death in any form, now reported impossibilities, a living weapon not registering hostility, a human child emitting resonance orders that machines could not interpret. The child lifted a hand, small fingers brushing over the glowing crack in the dragon's snout, and the creature leaned closer, lowering its immense skull until the tips of its horns brushed against the fractured sky. A sound, a vibration beyond mere sound, spread outward, touching the minds of the aliens like a pulse of forgotten memory. Some experienced it as music, others as a strange, tactile resonance, a feeling that penetrated bone and thought. The Zerathi scholars' neural tendrils quivered in uncontrollable delight, translating sensory input into data that crashed every computational model they had. Across the galaxy, ships on routine patrols and observation arrays reported anomalous readings in sectors previously considered dead space. A ripple of life, a resonance of order and chaos intertwined, had begun. The child whispered something faint, a sequence of syllables that seemed to bend reality. The dragon's eye dilated, black as a collapsing star, then shimmered with an internal light that danced like plasma across its iris. Its wings twitched, sending waves through the magnetic field that fractured the drones in orbit. Sparks arced from shields, communication channels collapsed into feedback loops. Yet no one panicked. Fear had transformed into mesmerized silence. Every species present, from the insectoid Viren to the crystalline Selker, understood at some deep, instinctive level that this moment was sacred, dangerous, and unparalleled. A sudden gust of charged wind swept through the ruins, carrying microscopic particles that glowed like molten silver. The child's hair lifted and floated around their head, and for the first time, the alien onlookers realized something impossible. The human was not merely surviving near the dragon, they were altering the ambient energy fields, stabilizing the creature, perhaps even communicating in a language that no translator, no matter how advanced, could parse. The dragon flexed its claws and tail, not in aggression, but in a rhythm that seemed to answer the child's whisper. Each movement sent subtle shock waves through the ground, and tiny obsidian shards responded, rotating in perfect synchronization like the gears of a machine designed to interface with life itself. Among the Tark warriors, one lowered a plasma rifle slightly, the gesture involuntary. In centuries, none had seen a predator of this magnitude yield or hesitate. The dragon had not roared, had not lunged, had not lashed out. And yet, the overwhelming display of power was undeniable. The child, impossibly small, held dominion, not through strength or weaponry, but through presence, courage, and something innate that reverberated across species and technology alike. For a fleeting moment, the aliens glimpsed the possibility that what they understood as hierarchy, dominance, and survival might be incomplete. A sudden tremor shuddered through the ground, strong enough to dislodge chunks of the fractured cityscape. The dragon flinched, a deep vibration escaping its throat, yet it did not retreat. Instead, it leaned into the child, as if drawing strength from their presence. The energy signature spiked again, this time in harmonic resonance that made the air shimmer and twist like a distorted hologram. Sensors went wild. Communication relays overloaded. Ships began recording footage that no analysis algorithm could ever decode fully. It was not mere life that was manifesting. It was life interacting with reality in ways that the galaxy had never catalogued. And then the child reached out a second time, brushing against the dragon's eyelid. The creature blinked slowly, a motion that sent tremors through time itself. From the eye, tiny pulses of light radiated outward, reaching the edges of the valley, spiraling into orbit, and beyond, into the void where distant civilizations registered anomalous subspace fluctuations. Some scholars whispered the word harmony, though none could explain why it fit. The dragon exhaled, a gentle stream of ionized gas that illuminated the alien faces with a pale violet glow, revealing expressions of awe, disbelief, and a creeping understanding. The beast was not tamed. It had chosen. The child took a cautious step back, and the dragon lowered its head slightly in response, as if yielding a gesture of recognition. For the aliens observing, centuries of fear and speculation condensed into a single, inescapable truth. Here was a creature of unparalleled power, a predator that had obliterated planets and fleets alike, and it had been touched, not by weaponry, not by cunning, but by something primitive and profound. Humanity, through this small figure, had demonstrated a resonance, a frequency of courage and empathy that even the galaxy's apex predator could not resist. The wind stilled, the energy pulses softened, and the ruins themselves seemed to sigh, settling into a fragile balance. Drones that had been orbiting the valley reactivated, recording with meticulous precision, but the data no longer made sense in any known system. The Tark warriors remained frozen, weapons lowered but eyes alert, their instincts screaming that this child, and the dragon, represented a force the galaxy could neither predict nor control. Somewhere above, the stars themselves shimmered as if in acknowledgement, and in that moment, all who watched understood that the rules had changed. The child and the dragon were no longer merely observers in the galaxy, they were a catalyst. The child's laugh rang out, soft but piercing, and the dragon's purr deepened in response. A new rhythm had begun, one that reverberated across species, civilizations, and the fragile threads of reality itself. The aliens remained in stunned silence, unable to comprehend whether they had witnessed salvation or the beginning of something far stranger. For the first time, fear was no longer the dominant force. Curiosity, awe, and something dangerously close to hope had taken its place. The child stepped further into the open, hand raised as if to beckon the universe itself, and the dragon's massive head followed, eyes never leaving their small companion. In the ruins of Epsilon Vorn, the first step toward a story no one had imagined unfolded quietly, impossibly, and irrevocably. The dragon's purr grew, low and steady, a vibration that penetrated both the obsidian ruins and the hulls of the hovering ships, a resonance so profound it seemed to stretch into the very bones of the galaxy. The child's small hand rested lightly on a cracked scale, and with that simple touch, the creature shifted, rolling onto its side in a motion both careful and colossal. Dust and energy particles swirled in concentric rings, refracting light in impossible colors, creating a halo around the pair that no sensor could accurately quantify. Drones in orbit stuttered, their circuits overwhelmed by a field of quantum harmonics emanating from the dragon's bioplasmic core, now flickering in tandem with the child's heartbeat. The aliens dared a collective breath. It was a breath of awe, disbelief, and a creeping terror, the realization that the rules they had lived by for millennia were no longer sufficient. The Zerathi's tendrils quivered, translating raw energy into neural data that crashed every interface, producing visions of impossible worlds where life itself responded to will alone. The Tark warriors, trained to suppress fear under the threat of annihilation, felt their instincts screaming, this was not a predator they could hunt. This was a living force rewriting the hierarchy of power in real time. The child crouched beside the dragon's massive head, eyes scanning the fissures in its scales, the faint glow of its core, the rhythm of its breathing. The dragon exhaled, a breath that carried charged ions and scents from 1,000 worlds it had flown over, now distilled into a single, palpable wave. The air shimmered, bending light as if reality itself were being folded around them. Tiny fragments of debris lifted from the ground, rotating in invisible currents that aligned perfectly with the dragon's movements. The child touched the creature's eye, and the orb blinked fully open, a universe of nebulae and collapsed stars reflected within it. A sound emerged from deep within the dragon's chest, beyond the purr, a low harmonic tone that resonated with subspace frequencies. The sensors in orbit registered a spike that could have been mistaken for the collapse of a nearby star. Ships rocked in their moorings as energy arcs danced across the valley floor, but the child remained calm, humming softly in response. The tone seemed to shift with the child's voice, creating a dialogue too subtle for the alien's instruments but unmistakably real. The dragon's massive wings twitched, not in aggression, but as if flexing in recognition of the child's rhythm, the membrane glowing faintly with phosphorescent light, tracing constellations long extinct. A Tark scout, unable to resist curiosity, extended a probe closer, and it disintegrated before it reached the dragon, vaporized not by fire or plasma but by an invisible field of harmonics. The child glanced at it, eyebrows furrowed, and the dragon exhaled a slow plume of charged gas that twisted around the probe's remnants like a protective barrier. The field stabilized, and the dust particles that had danced chaotically now rotated in perfect arcs around the pair, following invisible currents that seemed directed by the child's small gestures. The aliens recorded in silence, knowing any attempt to intervene would be catastrophic. Then came the subtle changes. The dragon shifted its gaze to the alien observers, massive eyes glowing with a violet light that carried intelligence older than most civilizations present. It exhaled again, and the resonance spread outward, brushing against the minds of the watchers. Panic and aggression evaporated, replaced by an unexpected calm, a perception that their intentions were meaningless in comparison to the bond forming before them. Weapons lowered, shields dimmed, and for a fleeting moment, the valley belonged entirely to the child and the dragon. The child moved along the creature's scales, exploring cracks, brushing over jagged edges with a delicate touch that seemed to repair the damage in subtle ways. The bioplasmic core pulsed more steadily, light flowing through fissures like molten silver, and the dragon responded by rolling slightly, positioning itself so that every movement was synchronized with the child's gestures. Even the fragmented energy of the surrounding cityscape seemed to stabilize, currents of plasma arcing in elegant patterns, glowing in colors that had no name, patterns that defied mathematics. Above, distant fleets of observation ships tried to maintain formation, but the energy fluctuations interfered with navigational drives. The human scientists in orbit transmitted frantic reports, their analysis systems crashing under the complexity of quantum resonance interlaced with biological feedback. They called it impossible, but all evidence pointed to a reality being rewritten in real time. The dragon's purr now incorporated subtle modulations, almost musical, almost a song, harmonizing with the child's humming. It was a melody that no instrument could capture, a sequence of vibrations that seemed to touch the core of existence itself. The valley quaked gently as the dragon shifted its immense bulk, lifting one claw with the care of a being handling a fragile artifact. The child reached out, tracing lines along the claws as if reading a language embedded in the scales, a script older than recorded history. Each contact sent ripples through the creature, reverberating outward into the alien ships, across the ruins, through the dust and ionized air. The surrounding species trembled, not from fear, but from awe. For once, power was not domination, it was understanding, cooperation, a symbiosis between a creature that had devoured worlds and a child who had yet to reach adolescence. Hours seemed to pass as minutes, the sun setting beyond the jagged horizons, casting long shadows that danced in tandem with the dragon's subtle movements. Tiny fragments of energy continued to levitate, tracing arcs that mirrored the child's gestures. The dragon's eyes followed every motion, every subtle tilt of the head, as if calculating possibilities far beyond the comprehension of the aliens who watched. And when the child finally leaned back, resting against the dragon's snout, the creature exhaled a final, calming pulse. It was not the end of its awakening, but the beginning of a bond that would ripple across the galaxy. The alien observers recorded, froze in disbelief, and for the first time, considered the unfathomable. That this child and this dragon, together, were rewriting the fundamental rules of life, energy, and connection. The night settled over Epsilon Vorn, but the glow from the dragon's core illuminated the ruins with a spectral light, a quiet signal to the universe that the deadliest force it had known had been met, not with fear, but with understanding. The child smiled faintly, eyes reflecting constellations that no longer existed, and for the first time, the dragon purred not as a warning, but as a recognition of a companion, a guide, and perhaps, a herald of a story the galaxy had yet to comprehend. The ripple of energy from the dragon's core stretched outward, reaching the distant fleets with a subtle insistence, like a tide brushing against the shores of reason. Alien commanders, high in their command citadels, watched screens flicker with impossible data. Sensors overloaded, shields fluctuated in inexplicable patterns, and communication channels shivered with feedback loops that defied any known logic. The dragon and the child moved together now, the massive creature bending its bulk with an elegance that belied its size, the child perched atop its snout as if leading the rhythm of every heartbeat. Across the valley, the ruins seemed to lean toward them, responding to energy currents no one could fully explain, forming a cathedral of fractured technology and cosmic light. The Tark Dominion's warriors whispered to one another, trying to interpret the behavior of a being that had shattered every tactical protocol in existence. The dragon no longer lay in stillness, it moved with purpose, navigating the debris with an instinctive grace that was synchronized with the child's gestures. Plasma fissures in the ground refracted violet light into strange, shifting patterns, illuminating alien faces that had never before seen anything but destruction in motion. The child extended a hand toward a cluster of drifting debris, and the fragments spun upward, aligning themselves into lattices that pulsed with energy in perfect resonance with the dragon's core. It was as though the child's touch could coax order from chaos, and the dragon acted as conduit and amplifier. Scouts from other civilizations, watching from orbit, recorded the impossible. Even the Zerathi, whose species prided themselves on decoding complex energy patterns, trembled as they attempted to quantify the harmonic interactions. Their neural tendrils sparked and seared against the confines of their biology as they realized the resonance between child and dragon existed on levels no species had ever encountered: quantum, subspace, bioenergetic, and perhaps even metaphysical. Every attempt to compute the bond produced anomalies so extreme that observational satellites were forced to shut down intermittently. Across the galaxy, some researchers whispered that humanity might have evolved a latent capacity, one that could interact with life, energy, and time in ways no machine could predict. The dragon's massive wings flexed, generating currents of charged particles that spiraled around the child in protective spirals. It was not aggression, but a silent declaration: nothing would touch this human. The wind carried ions, dust, and microscopic plasma filaments, illuminating the valley in hues that no eye could name. The child leaned forward, and with a tilt of their head, a beam of energy from the dragon's bioplasmic core followed, coiling through the air like a serpent responding to a melody. Tiny specks of matter, previously inert, began to oscillate with subtle patterns, tracing geometries too complex for conventional mathematics. The observers realized that the dragon's body was not merely alive, it was a generator, a tuner, and a translator of cosmic forces responding to the child's intent. Alien dignitaries on hovering platforms exchanged frantic messages. Some advocated withdrawal, fearing contamination of their fleets by the unknown energy field. Others, particularly scholars and diplomats, urged caution and observation. Even the most hardened warlords felt a tremor of uncertainty. They had trained their entire lives to interpret power, and yet this spectacle refused all comprehension. The dragon's head tilted in synchronization with the child's subtle hand gestures, wings folding and unfolding in arcs that created gravitational distortions subtle enough to bend light but strong enough to interfere with targeting systems. Instruments recorded energies that warped the local spacetime fabric, producing localized gravity wells that lifted debris and even small vehicles into slow arcs of movement. The child hummed a soft, lilting tune, the sound barely audible over the hum of the dragon's core, yet its effects were undeniable. The melody created interference patterns in the electromagnetic spectrum, stabilizing chaotic currents that had surged through the valley since the dragon's arrival. Dust motes and shards of shattered stone began to orbit in mesmerizing sequences, tracing spirals and helixes that mirrored the child's own movements. The Tark warriors dared not interrupt, their instincts urging caution as their every sensor went into overload. Even the smallest misstep could provoke a reaction that no species had survived. Yet the dragon remained calm, responding only to the human presence, its vast body a conduit of controlled, unimaginable energy. Above, alien fleets attempted to maintain orbital positions, but gravitic flux from the dragon's presence made navigation treacherous. Energy fields radiated outward, causing sensors to distort the size and shape of ships, producing illusions of massive beasts twisting through the void. Communication arrays failed intermittently, translating messages into static and harmonic echoes that no translator could parse. It became apparent that the dragon and child were not just interacting with matter, they were influencing perception, bending fields of cognition and energy with subtle precision. A collective realization settled over the alien observers: this was no longer merely survival or control, it was an awakening. The dragon, previously the galaxy's apex predator, had been reoriented by the child's presence. It moved not to hunt, but to participate in something beyond violence or instinct. Each gesture from the child directed complex energy flows, guiding the dragon in patterns that rebuilt the environment, stabilizing the ruins and purifying ionized clouds of plasma. The landscape seemed to respond, as if it, too, recognized the authority of the bond forming. The child's laughter rang out softly, a melody that synchronized with the dragon's purr, sending waves of harmonic energy outward, rippling through the alien ranks. Ships hovered, weapons lowered, and even the most cautious observers felt the strange, unyielding pull of respect, curiosity, and awe. In that valley, amidst the ruins and charged air, the galaxy witnessed a new kind of command, a force not born of domination, but of resonance. The dragon moved in perfect attunement with the child, wings and tail folding in fluid arcs, sending localized gravitational waves that altered the path of every remaining shard of debris. And as the sun dipped below the horizon of Epsilon Vorn, casting fractured shadows across the alien faces, the child leaned against the dragon's snout, eyes reflecting not only the glow of the core but the infinite expanse beyond. The alien fleets remained frozen, unsure whether to retreat or approach, as the dragon's purr deepened into a low, harmonic song that seemed to resonate with every life form present. The resonance carried the message silently yet unmistakably: the balance of power had shifted. Not through conquest or violence, but through courage, empathy, and an understanding that even the deadliest force in the galaxy could yield when met with a presence unbound by fear. The valley became a nexus, a place where the impossible became tangible, and the galaxy's denizens began to sense that a new order, unpredictable, profound, and irrevocable, was quietly emerging. The child and the dragon moved beyond the Valley of Ruins, leaving behind the shattered spires and orbiting fleets that had borne witness to the first impossible act. The obsidian plain stretched toward the horizon, punctuated by shards of glowing rock and fissures that hummed faintly with residual energy from the dragon's core. Dust motes spiraled in the thin air, still resonating with the harmonic imprint left by the child's touch, forming luminous trails that marked their path. Alien observers, tracking from afar, struggled to maintain sensor contact, as the dragon's presence warped not only gravity but subspace signals, creating a localized field where conventional physics became unreliable. With each step, the dragon's massive limbs compressed the ground, sending microshockwaves through the valley and distant mountain ranges, yet it moved with a precision that suggested intent rather than instinct. The child perched lightly upon its snout, humming softly, guiding the creature through invisible currents of energy. Tiny bioplasmic filaments leaked from the dragon's wings and tail, coalescing into patterns that shimmered like miniature galaxies, tracing spirals and loops that seemed to communicate a language older than civilization itself. The aliens observing could only guess at the meaning, their sensors failing to resolve the complexity, and many began to speculate that the child was not merely directing the dragon, but harmonizing with the very fabric of life around it. A distant asteroid belt loomed, its fragments jagged and unstable, yet as the dragon approached, the debris began to shift and float, aligning with magnetic and gravitational currents emitted from the dragon's core. The child tilted their head, adjusting the rhythm of their humming, and the asteroid fragments responded, spiraling into elegant arcs, forming a protective corridor for the pair. Sensors in orbit recorded the movement as impossible, massive rocks defying traditional physics, guided solely by resonance. The dragon moved with deliberate care, wings extended partially to stabilize gravitational perturbations, yet never breaking the delicate flow of energy orchestrated by the child. Alien fleets attempted intercepts, broadcasting warnings and orders, but the dragon's field interfered with both communications and propulsion. Ships stalled mid-orbit, caught in subtle gravitational eddies, unable to advance or retreat without risking catastrophic collapse. The Tark Dominion's commanders exchanged frantic signals, unsure whether to initiate aggression or maintain distance. Their instruments suggested that the child's presence was creating a resonance frequency that nullified traditional energy weaponry within a kilometer radius. Even the Zerathi, whose neural tendrils interfaced directly with their ship systems, could only detect fragments of the pattern before the signals became incomprehensible. It was no longer a battle of firepower, it was a test of perception, patience, and the capacity to understand a force far beyond any technological measure. As they ascended toward a region of fractured moons and ionized gas clouds, the dragon's wings beat slowly, generating shockwaves of charged particles that ionized the surrounding medium. Lightning-like arcs danced across the void, but rather than striking indiscriminately, they coalesced into coherent structures, glowing filaments that followed the child's subtle gestures. The child extended a hand, and the arcs bent, spiraling into luminous lattices that mirrored the rhythmic pulses of the dragon's core. Alien scientists hypothesized that the two were creating a form of localized, self-sustaining plasma lattice, a phenomenon previously thought impossible outside of theoretical models. Through the nebulae, distant observers reported strange phenomena. The ionized clouds ahead of the dragon began to resonate with faint harmonic pulses, reacting to a frequency that seemed biological yet hyper-advanced. Even the most powerful telescopes detected fluctuating light patterns, impossible to reconcile with conventional matter. In orbit, fleets attempted cautious tracking, but each step closer brought instruments into resonance with the dragon's field, scrambling data and producing interference so profound that the aliens were forced to retreat, unable to maintain accurate measurements. The child's humming seemed to guide the flows, each tone subtly influencing the dragon's movement, which in turn adjusted gravitational and energy fields across a wide radius. Time began to feel unstable. Minutes stretched and compressed irregularly as localized space warped in response to the child dragon resonance. Shadows bent in impossible directions, ionized particles lingered in arcs that defied gravity, and the surrounding nebula shimmered with colors outside the known spectrum. Alien fleet struggled to maintain a coherent frame of reference. Some sensors detected the pair multiple kilometers ahead simultaneously, while others suggested they had vanished entirely. The dragon moved as though aware of every subtle energy fluctuation in real time, wings slicing through fields of charged particles with both care and precision, while the child's guidance ensured no catastrophe occurred. Small, uninhabited moons trembled as the pair passed overhead, their surfaces subtly reformed by the gravitational harmonics of the dragon's bulk. Dust shifted, rocks levitated in arcs, and thin atmospheres realigned along invisible currents. For the first time, alien scholars began to speak not of fear, but of possibility. Humanity, through this small child, had demonstrated an ability to harmonize with forces that even the galaxy's apex predators had struggled to manipulate. Some began to speculate that the child's resonance could interact with fundamental constants, subtly influencing matter, energy, and even time itself. The child leaned forward, tapping the dragon's scales in gentle, deliberate sequences. Each tap produced a visible ripple across the creature's bioplasmic core, a wave of light that expanded outward into the surrounding environment. Plasma arcs reorganized into elegant helixes, asteroid fragments adjusted their orbits to match the pattern, and even ionized gas clouds shifted subtly, forming pathways that reflected the child's direction of travel. The dragon's eye, massive and unfathomable, followed each motion with patient awareness, wings adjusting their beat to maintain stability across the fragile harmonic lattice. As night fell across the distant nebulae, the dragon and child came to rest on a moon whose surface glittered with reflective mineral veins. The bioplasmic core glowed faintly, casting long, undulating shadows across the alien terrain. The child dismounted carefully, brushing dust from their tunic, while the dragon folded its wings and lowered its head in a gesture of calm and trust. From orbit, alien observers recorded every movement, unable to interpret the sequence fully but recognizing its importance. The child had guided the deadliest predator in the galaxy across impossible terrain, not through force, but through resonance, empathy, and understanding. A new order was forming, subtle yet profound, in which courage and connection, rather than conquest and weaponry, held dominion over worlds. The dragon's purr, deep and rhythmic, merged with the child's hum, sending harmonic waves through the moon's crust and into the void beyond. Dust spiraled, plasma arcs stabilized, and even distant stars seemed to shimmer in response. The galaxy, watching from the darkness, sensed a shift. The child and dragon had not simply survived, they were shaping the environment, bending energy and matter to a new, harmonious will. Somewhere deep in the folds of subspace, the first echoes of a story that would reshape civilizations had begun to spread, carried on waves of light, resonance, and hope. The child and the dragon hovered above the reflective veins of the moon, the faint glow of the bioplasmic core casting ripples of violet and silver across the mineral-laden terrain. Orbital fleets, once bristling with weapons and suspicion, had gradually withdrawn, leaving the pair in a quiet, tenuous dominion over the remote corner of the galaxy. Sensors struggled to make sense of the resonance that radiated outward, a harmonic frequency interlaced with the dragon's bioplasmic signature and the child's inexplicable biological imprint. Even the most advanced algorithms failed to classify it, leaving observers to conclude that they were witnessing a new form of life, a synthesis of sentience, energy, and will that had no precedent in recorded history. The dragon flexed its wings slowly, stretching enormous limbs with deliberate precision, while the child perched upon its snout, humming softly. The tone had changed, no longer a simple melody of reassurance, but a complex cadence that seemed to weave the fabric of the surrounding energy field into a stable lattice. Asteroid fragments, dust motes, and ionized gas clouds all responded, aligning into patterns that resembled faint constellations. Observers who had lingered in orbit whispered that the child was no longer guiding the dragon in a conventional sense, rather, the pair had achieved a form of symbiosis where intent, energy, and movement were indistinguishable. The galaxy watched, unsure if they were witnessing life, a new technology, or a force beyond comprehension. With a careful tilt of its massive head, the dragon dipped toward a fractured ridge, its talons hovering above the ground without disturbing the surface. The child extended a hand, tracing arcs in the air. Plasma filaments lifted from the ridge, weaving into elegant coils, fusing fractured rock into stable structures. It was a reconstruction, subtle but miraculous, as if the child's presence had initiated a repair not only of the environment but of the latent energy imbalances left behind by centuries of warfare. Tiny subspace ripples emanated from the scene, detectable even in distant systems, carrying the signature of stabilization that historians would later call the first harmony. From orbit, alien scientists recorded patterns that defied classification. The Zerathi marveled at the precision of the energy flows, their tendrils quivered as they realized the dragon's bioplasmic core and the child's neural output were entwined into a coherent resonance field. Gravitational anomalies, energy fluctuations, and harmonic vibrations coalesced into a lattice of cosmic balance. Ships that had followed the child and dragon hesitated at the edge of the field, their instruments unable to reconcile conventional physics with the observed phenomena. Even the Tark Dominion commanders, masters of warfare, could only watch in awe, realizing that the child had neutralized fear through connection rather than conquest. The child's humming shifted subtly, a signal the dragon seemed to interpret with perfect fidelity. With a measured beat of its wings, the creature lifted higher, guiding the child into a slow, spiraling ascent above the moon's surface. Dust and fragments followed in elegant arcs, suspended in the harmonic field, forming luminous ribbons that traced the pair's path. From below, the valley and the moon's fissures responded, energy flows aligning to restore balance to structures long shattered by conflict. It was a choreography of life and matter, a display that communicated without words. The child and the dragon were a single organism in purpose, a guardian and a guide, and the universe was their canvas. As the pair reached the apex of the spiraling ascent, the child's gaze extended beyond the visible stars. Something shifted in the resonance field, a subtle, pulsing feedback, like a distant echo calling across light years. The dragon's wings flared, creating a cascade of ionized particles that scattered like microscopic suns, and the child leaned forward, responding instinctively to the pulse. The effect rippled through subspace, alerting civilizations that had long forgotten the legends of the Epsilon Dragon. Observers in remote systems swore they saw constellations brighten, nebulae shimmer, and empty space itself quiver in acknowledgement. The dragon exhaled, a soft, harmonic purr that resonated with the child's frequency, sending a wave of stabilization through surrounding systems. The child finally spoke. Not in words, but in a series of harmonic tones that merged perfectly with the dragon's purr. The sound propagated through matter and energy alike, reaching every watcher with an instinctive understanding. War machines stilled, aggressive impulses softened, and across the galaxy, observers felt an unprecedented calm. It was a demonstration that power did not require domination, that intelligence was most profound when coupled with empathy, and that courage was not measured by destruction but by connection. Even those who had never seen the child understood, this was a new era. The dragon landed softly on the moon's surface, folding its wings around the child in a protective arc. The child stepped down, bare feet touching the reflective mineral veins, eyes scanning the horizon as if measuring the possibilities of countless worlds. From orbit, alien ships recorded the final act: no battle, no devastation, only the quiet mastery of energy, trust, and harmony. The field around the pair slowly stabilized, leaving the surrounding nebulae and asteroid belts aligned in balanced arcs, and the broken moons appeared subtly restored. The child had not simply tamed the dragon, together they had recalibrated the environment, the energy currents, and the understanding of all who witnessed them. A gentle wave of the child's hand sent the last of the floating fragments into orderly orbits, each particle responding as if acknowledging its purpose. The dragon lowered its head in a slow bow, massive eyes reflecting the stars, and the child placed a hand on the glowing scale, whispering a soft harmonic tone. A pulse radiated outward, reaching distant systems, carrying a promise: the era of fear was over, replaced by resonance, understanding, and the quiet power of life connected across the galaxy. The alien observers, finally able to process the sight, recorded it as history. Generations would study the event, speculate on the implications, and name it with reverence. Humanity's place in the galaxy had shifted, not through conquest but through empathy and courage. The child and the dragon rose once more, wings and pulse synchronized, ascending beyond the nebulae into the stars. The valley of Epsilon Vorn settled into quiet equilibrium, a monument not of destruction but of potential. And as they vanished into the vast expanse, a subtle, harmonic resonance lingered in the minds and hearts of every witness. The story had ended, but its impact would echo across the cosmos forever.